I'm super glad to be here. This is something I've looked forward to doing for a long time, and I've talked to a bunch of you already. I'm working on a second book actually called Secondhand, which I think the title explains itself. So that also explains why I'm here. And so Kyle's been nice enough to introduce me to some of you folks and just teach me a little bit more about what iFixit's doing. But I've got a bunch of slides and a bunch of stuff I want to tell you about, so I'm going to just get right to it. This is a pretty standard looking scrapyard in South China circa about 2008. The reason I ended up there, I have a lot of friends in the junk business in South China. I happened to be down there for something not related to junk, but the guy who owns this place heard I was there. He called me up. He says, "Hey, I've got a new junkyard open out at the port. Want to see it?" And I said, "Hey, I have nothing going on. Pick me up." And so he sent his BMW limousine to pick me up and show his new junkyard, because these guys make a lot of money. That's actually kind of fun. Those are 3 helicopters that were shredded in LA, and then they're sorting the metals at his new yard. So if you've ever wanted to know what 3 shredded helicopters look like, there it is. So he takes me for a walk around the yard, and I see this big pile of cable. And Chinese scrapyards are filled with cable. I think we all know that. It's difficult to recycle, not impossible, but difficult to recycle. And so I just walked over, and I thought that looks interesting. And as I got closer, it got more interesting. Christmas tree lights. It's about 2.5 tons of Christmas tree lights. And I had kind of a moment there. I'm a journalist. I'm looking to sensationalize everything and anything. And it occurred to me as I was starting to think about Junkyard Planet, I'll sensationalize Christmas tree lights. So what I wanted to do was find out what happens to Christmas tree lights when they're sent to South China. Joe told me he buys a lot of them and he sends them to factories, but we had to go to dinner. We couldn't go to the factories that process them. So it became kind of a quest of mine to find out, how are Christmas tree lights recycled in China? So that led me to this gentleman, my friend Johnson Zheng. Johnson is based in Vancouver, and what Johnson did around 2010, 2011, he would spend about half the year in rented cars driving around the United States, going scrapyard to scrapyard to scrapyard, buying stuff with cash, putting it in containers and shipping it back to China. And one of the things he was known for buying was low-grade copper wire, including Christmas tree lights. So Johnson, I called up Johnson. I said, "Can you show me where Christmas tree lights are recycled?" He says, "Well, why don't you come on the road with me for a week, and I'll take you around. I'll show you where I get them, and then I'll send you to China." I was living in China at that time. "And I'll send you down to a place called Shijiao where they recycle them." I said, "Great." So I went on the road with Johnson, buying scrap for a week in his rented car. And everywhere we went, we came across Christmas tree lights. This was actually outside of Columbus, Ohio. This was Indianapolis. And this was North Carolina. There are hundreds of thousands of tons of Christmas tree lights flowing into scrapyards across the United States every year. And it's just another one of these products that you don't think of, needing a waste stream, but it does. The one Kyle and I were talking about yesterday were vaping, devices. I mean, there's an enormous amount of vaping scrap out there, but this is the one that caught my eye in the late 2000s. So after driving around with Johnson for a week, I said, "You got to send me now to China. You got to send me to the place." And he says, "Okay, you call Raymond, my buddy in Shijiao. He'll show you how it's done." So I take a plane to Shijiao, and this is where I end up. If you've spent any time in China, nobody is going to show you their factory without taking you for a meal, and more likely than not getting you drunk first. It's really the truth. And it's a trust thing. If they say, we figure if you eat and drink with them, you're trustworthy. So that's Raymond's family. And most scrap businesses are family business. They start as family businesses. I grew up in a family scrap business. Raymond, this is sort of Raymond's extended family and a couple other folks thrown in. And Raymond's kind of a shy guy. He's the only guy you can't actually see in the photo. He's down here. You can kind of get his legs. But after eating this fantastic meal in Qingyuan, I think is where we had it, he said, "Okay, well, we're going to show you a few things." And so the first thing he wanted to show me was actually the next morning. And I had heard about these, and this is going to be a video we'll play in just, not quite yet, I just want to explain what it is first. So I want you to see the local scrap market. So I knew about these, but I'd never seen one. I'd never been bold enough to just walk into one myself. So Shijiao, which is a town none of you have ever heard of, I'm guessing, unless you read Junkyard Planet, has about 10 of these, had about 10 of these. And what they were is overnight they would receive shipments of scrap metal. It's a metal facility overnight from around the world, not just the United States, Europe, Japan, wherever. They'd empty the containers, the inventory out there, and then the scrap traders from around town would come, wait outside the gate, till it open. They open usually around 6 or 7 a.m., rush in, and everything is sold within an hour or two. And then they take it home to their home workshops and recycle it, whether that means taking it apart, stripping it, whatever. This is Shijiao. There were 10 of these. If you think about Guangdong province, the largest scrap importation center in the world, that means thousands across Guangdong. That means many more thousands across China. This is where all that metal scrap was going. So why don't you go ahead and I'm going to talk you through this. So Raymond, I think you just click the image. There. Okay. So this is as it opens up, and there's about 100, 110, 120 guys, and I say guys because it's accurate. 99% of the people who are doing this buying are men. And then they're going to bring this home. And you can see everybody's rushing in. It's kind of like, the big discount sale right after Christmas. Only this happens every day, 51 weeks of the year. The only week it doesn't happen is Chinese New Year. So you're going to see me getting some looks because they're not accustomed to white guys walking in with cameras going like this, trying to stay steady. And they're wondering, what I'm doing there. As you can see, and you're going to see me get thrown out eventually as well. Yeah, that guy was not happy. So what you're going to see here as we all walk in to buy scrap is you're going to see some looming bales of wire. Yeah, and that wire is all imported from the United States. This particular yard, this market, would receive around 6 shipping containers of wire from the United States every night. They pull it out. And these guys know what they're buying. There's some radiators. You'll see some radiators in there too. I hope you can see it okay. But basically what they'll do is they'll come in and like a bale like that, or actually that one, you can see the different colors. The amazing thing about this is these guys know the wire so well. They'll be able to say, okay, the blue wire has 82% copper content, the yellow 79, the white 63. And they're able to make a calculation in their head right there on how to buy it. This is not something you're taking home to set on fire. It's a very, very precise business. And it's kind of fun. They'll look at it, they'll decide what they want to pay for it, and it's very much, it can get heated. It's dibs. You put your hand on it, and it's yours to make the offer on. And you usually do, because if you don't buy it, somebody else will. Same with the radiators. And this, again, thousands of these every morning across China. Imported scrap. Yeah, you can see. You're going to see the camera. They're going to shut me down really quickly here. But every piece of this is gone in 3 hours, if not sooner. And they may look like they're not interested. They're just playing it cool for the coming negotiation. And then they shut me down. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, this is what happens to that stuff. That's Raymond actually. He's the guy who owns the Christmas tree factory that we're going to see. You can see another guy taking a picture of him because he never lets anybody take his picture. So they figure, well, if Adam's taking a picture, I'm going to take a picture too. But this is just a simple wire stripper. And it'll run a cut right down the insulation, and then there'll be guys, you can see the one up here on the left, just pulling it off, and you're able to basically mechanically, with hands, or there's some machines that'll do it, pull the copper apart. There's no sense in setting it on fire because the insulation also has value. In fact, at one point, around 2012, I was being told that the market was so tight, so competitive, that the big processors were looking at the insulation as their profit margin. They weren't making money on the copper. So it doesn't make sense to burn the stuff. Okay, and that's what you get, clean copper. And obviously that hasn't been burnt because it'd be crazy to burn it. And that's a really, really great commodity, that can be sold for, considerable money. All right, here's the next video. So anyway, after showing me the market, we drove over to the local Christmas tree light recycling facility. And this is it, and I'm going to play this video. The only thing I'll tell you before we play it is Shijiao is the Christmas tree light recycling capital of China for reasons I don't know. It's just that's where people started doing it. And there's, I believe, 9 factories in Shijiao. And Raymond told me that they all do around 2 million pounds of Christmas tree lights a year. So that's a lot of Christmas tree lights. The plant you're about to see, it took them about a year to develop, but there's others in China like it. The concept is pretty simple. If you know how to pan for gold, you know how to kind of build this. So let's run this. There we go. Okay, first thing you do is you take Christmas tree lights, cut them up, toss them in the shredder. That's not smoke, that's steam. The pipe you see going on down into there, that's water, because it gets really, really hot. The blades that are chopping these things up are going really fast, and if you didn't have water going in there, they'd explode. What comes out is a goopy substance, which is basically water, plastic, a little bit of glass, copper, everything that a Christmas tree light is. And this fellow then shovels them onto these tables. And this is where the panning for gold goes. So the tables are tilted this way, and the water shoots up, and the plastic and the glass goes off the side. And you see the streak of copper there? It's heavier than the plastic and the glass. So that's how you separate. I edited this, it's about a 10-minute video otherwise. But you can see it's the same concept. You can see the streak of plastic and glass going off the side there. Beautiful separation. But it took them, it took Raymond's nephew, it's his nephew, and there you go, look at that. Who needs to burn when you can do that, huh? So low tech. It took Raymond's nephew, I believe he said about 6 months to calibrate the thing. It's not trivial to do it. What happens to the various stuff? So the insulation was then going to, at Raymond's plant, was going to a slipper sole manufacturer. So you're treading on last year's Christmas in a sense. The copper, this is my favorite detail. You want circular economy? I will give you circular economy. Sold to Christmas tree light factories. There it is. So don't let the EU lecture you about China, about circular economy. That China's already got it down. And there you can see, this is a much better picture where you can see sort of the streak of copper coming off this thing. So this, it's a very simple process. And we said, great, we're running into resource shortages, save the planet, everything. The Chinese have figured it out. This is world refined copper usage, 1900 to 2015 by year. That's crazy. We're using more and more. And at the time I wrote Junkyard Planet, it all seemed really logical to me. But the problem is the world is much more complicated than that. And in recent years, I think we all know this, things have changed with the recycling economy. And so, what for me was a truth yesterday, it was a truth, has sort of become a little bit more mythological. So I want you to see the things that have made me change my mind somewhat on this stuff and shift my attention more to repair. All right, first, this is a great chart that comes from Joe Pickard at ISRI. He's their economist. And this is U.S. exports of all scrap commodities to China. You can see they started declining in 2011. That was really the peak. Right around the time the Christmas tree light recycling was booming. So, we've been hearing this year, it's 2018, we're hearing about how China's taking less and less. Well, that decline had already started happening. You can see it right there. And this is as good as it comes. And we all should have probably started thinking about why it's declining back then, if you're interested in recycling as a phenomenon, as an environmental solution, because if somebody's not buying that recycling, it's headed to the landfill. And the Chinese, who are the world's biggest buyers, started to lower the amount of recycling they were buying at the early part of this decade. Well, what happened? A few factors. The fact of the matter is we're not running out. And I like copper because it impacts so many different minerals. It's not just copper. It's nickel, it's gold, it's some rare earths. All of that goes together. And as prices go up, as things get scarce, people start looking for other sources. And it may be really dirty to dig some of this up, but we're finding more and more reserves. Recycling competes against new. And people are and if you're going to compete, you're going to find more. This is from the U.S. Geological Society, USGS and USGS. And here it is, if you look at the total resources that have been identified and are presumed to be undiscovered, and this doesn't mean ocean floor either, that's excluded from this. There's an enormous amount of stuff out there still. So when it comes to copper, nickel, gold, we are not running out anytime soon. And, even if, United States companies aren't digging this up, the Chinese, who are the world's biggest resource extractors, know this, and they are going to continue to build mine capacity to take care of that stuff. So that is also driving down prices. Other factors. I always call it the elephant in the Chinese scrap heap, labor costs in China. So one of the things that enabled China to become such a recycling and manufacturing powerhouse, and they go together, was the fact that it was cheap to do there, Well, look at the price of labor over the last few years. It's becoming more and more expensive, and that stuff is getting pushed either offshore, they're shutting down those plants, or the processing is happening here. But it's becoming more expensive, period, to recycle everywhere. And so that is driving down the imports. Another thing, this is China's high-speed rail network. China, for the last 15 to 20 years, went on the biggest infrastructure binge in the history of the world. That's ending. And so again, less demand, less need for things like copper and steel. That's a problem. And then Kyle and I were just talking about this data the other night. If you look at just the electronics, the devices are becoming more lightweight and less resource intensive. There may be more of them, but this came from Walter Acorn at the Consumer Electronics Association, and you can see just the actual mass of product stock is declining. Most of that is due to the decline of the CRTs, but in general, as devices become smaller, they're just using less stuff, and so you have less of demand there. And then we have China saying, stop your recycling. I wish I had a better slide for, symbolizing that, but we're going to go with Diana Ross and the Supremes. But no, China has said they don't want to import. There's a lot of controversy around why they're doing this. I think there's two reasons. One, they want to develop their domestic recycling industry without competition from foreign recyclers who have better quality stuff. And there's also a nationalist component to it. So it's changing everything, and it's driving the price of recyclables down. And that means, as we all have heard, paper and plastic are increasingly going to landfills, and it's becoming less and less economically viable to recycle the metals. So what I've been thinking about is, what do we do? And that's partly the topic of the next book. One of the things I like to do is look back at history, because most things repeat. And so there is, I think, a historical analog for what we're going through right now, and it's in Star Wars. So I love Star Wars for a lot of reasons, but one is it has a lot of junkyards in it. Every single Star Wars film, there's scrapyards. Have you ever noticed that? It's a huge topic in the Star Wars series. Episode 1, crappy Episode 1, there's Anakin walking through his junkyard. But the funny thing is, if you grew up in a junkyard, if you spend time in junkyards like I do, the one thing you always notice about the Star Wars junkyards is they're not actually doing any recycling. The stuff's just sitting there. There's no balers, there's no shredders, there's no Christmas tree lights recycling, there's nobody even setting things on fire. So, and you can see this, instead you've got people just picking up stuff. The Jawas are my favorite, because my relatives, when they came to the U.S., they were basically Jawas. They were picking stuff off the streets and putting it in horse-drawn carts and trucks. And so the Jawas are basically the Russian Jews of their time, Russian immigrant Jews of their time, except they have a sand crawler. And inside the sand crawler, it's all this sort of fixable stuff. Nobody's melting it down. This is my favorite example of something weird in the Star Wars recycling economy. So we've got this big Star Destroyer, and they generate a lot of trash. And in Empire, they dump the trash. Did you ever notice what the trash is? It's big hunks of steel. You should be melting that down. Like, you don't just throw giant, TIE fighter size hunks of steel into the solar system or wherever it is. You melt it down, but they don't. They throw it away. So why would they throw it away? Well, one reason would be it's not worth very much money. There has to be, within the Star Wars universe, basically resource surplus. And again, here's another example, but crash Star Destroyer. Think of India. Think of all the pics you've seen of the beached ships in India where they take them apart by hand. Why aren't they doing that on Jakku? Again, because there's no value to it. Instead, you've got Rey driving around picking up small pieces. And then what does she do? Those pieces are reusable, and she sells it to this dude for portions. So my theory is there's resource oversupply, and here's Mustafar, the volcano planet. They've got so much steel available to them, the Empire does. They have an entire planet that all they do is mine lava. Free metal. So it drives down the cost of the commodity, and so if you find used stuff, what do you do with it? You fix it. Because there's no value otherwise. The value add is what has been done to it. There is no value in the commodity itself. And I think that's one of the things you're starting to see with recyclers that I spend time with. More and more recyclers, whether electronic or otherwise, are now setting up what they'll call their eBay rooms. And what are the eBay rooms? The eBay rooms are they're pulling parts. And you've seen it. You go on eBay. You all know this. eBay is filled with parts from scrapyards because there's no value. I mean, believe me, there's still value in copper and gold and everything else. but there's a whole lot more embodied value in the stuff itself. And so it's been a bit of a revelation to me just going from scrapyard to scrapyard as you are beginning to see the refocus onto the resource efficiency, and that is the repair, the parts. They're taking their cue, I think. Well, if you tell them they're taking their cue from Star Wars, they'll say you're crazy. But essentially, that's what it is. This isn't new. It's happening in the United States, but it's been happening in junkyards and recycling operations around the world for much longer. So this is the famous 60 Minutes episode from 2008, filmed in Guiyu. I'm sure some of you know about it. South China, this is the great e-waste dumping ground, notorious. If you look up Guiyu on Google, you will get tens of thousands of responses saying that it's the world's greatest environmental disaster. I have been visiting Guiyu since 2003. It's not a place you want to vacation. It's also not a place you want to eat the seafood, trust me. You would see in the early 2000s stuff like this where people would be taking gold-bearing scrap, dumping it in barrels with chemicals, and you'd get gorgeous orange clouds. I mean, the color was really something to see. But, of course, you don't want to get this close to it. But the thing is, one thing I know about scrapyards, having grown up in one, is that there's usually more value than what the camera shows. And so it became kind of a quest of mine, and I did this in Junkyard Planet to show that there's more of an economy happening there than is typically presented in these sort of environmental disaster stories that you see in on 60 Minutes. The first thing I wanted to do when I went to Guiyu was I didn't want to just see what was going on outside. If I take you to your local recycling company and I only show you pictures of what's going on out back in the dumpsters, is that an accurate picture of what's happening there? Not at all. You need to go inside. So here's what's inside. There's one of the biggest warehouses in Guiyu, and that's a bunch of Samsung boards. Everybody tells me you can't get Samsung boards, Well, if you go to Guiyu, you can get a lot of them because they're flowing right out of the factory. Somehow or another, somebody's getting them there. And there's thousands and thousands in that pile right there. And I don't need to tell you, some of those are still going to be good. And you could pack them up and you can make a sale. And that's precisely what's going on in Guiyu. 75% of the business in Guiyu was parts. 25% is extraction. And if you go into Guiyu workshops, that's what you can see. This is I don't know where I put the copy of the photo without the copyright on it. I'm sorry about that. But this is your standard Guiyu workshop, and what are they doing? They would only let me take the picture from here, but thanks to Zoom, digital Zoom, you can see what she's doing. She's picking parts off the boards and cutting processors out. And that stuff's going to be sold. Well, here you can see they're again, you don't do that if you're going to set this stuff on fire, right? You're going to do that if you're selling it individually. And that's what she's doing. Some of that will be sold for recycling. It won't all be reused, but some of it will be. And it won't just be sold in China. I mean, the best people to get the most gold out of that aren't in China. They're in Japan. You go to Mitsubishi, you go to Dowa, Kosaka. These are incredibly technologically efficient operations. And the business people in Guiyu are not primitives. They know how to access those markets. The other thing you'll have is you'll actually have parts markets. I mean, if somebody from iFixit came across a display case like that, I think it'd be really tempting to buy some inventory. That's precisely what they're doing. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. There's two streams. One is the reuse stream, and this stuff is being sold primarily to toy factories throughout South China. The right is the recycling stream. Those are processors going to go for gold recovery, probably in Japan. So this is the main parts market in Guiyu. Take note of 4 stories. And was it 4 stories? 5 stories. And all of these motorcycles, you notice, have these containers on them. What are they doing? They're going in there and they're buying chips for their factory's production that day. Maybe you need, 500 486 DX2s if you could get them. They're really hard to get, which would be perfectly fine to run, a sign, that tells you what the daily specials are at the local diner up the street. So here we are inside. So this is one aisle of the market out of it would be 9 on this side of the building, 5 stories. You can see people really don't want to be photographed. When I took out the camera, everybody ran because it's granny market and it's been demonized, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for not. And so you don't want to be photographed in here. But it's not just underground. This is Shenzhen, and we all know Shenzhen. And this is the Huaqiangbei neighborhood. Has anybody been to Huaqiangbei? Okay, so you know what I'm going to show them. So Huaqiangbei is a globally important parts market in Shenzhen. It's where if you are designing anything, if you are making anything, you go there to find the parts. Inevitably, whenever I'm in Huaqiangbei, and I like to go there because it's super interesting, and you all would enjoy it as well, there's inevitably some guy walking around with a Golden State Warriors jersey. It's just inevitable I'm going to see that guy. And he looks really jet-lagged, you know, because he's just in from over here, and he's looking for parts. And that's what it's all about. So this is the SEG parts market. And it's 14 floors like this. It's a mall, and the stalls are as tight as what you saw in Guiyu. And you can buy anything there. And this is a standard display. So you'll see, I don't even know what kind of boards these are. Maybe somebody in here would know. But you don't just pull a board off the wall there and say, you know, I'm taking it to the cash register. You see the board, and you say, I need 2,500 of these. And they order them up from their factories in Guiyu, because that's where all the e-waste is going from around the world, or was. And they then pull them there. Now they're going to other places, but they can still pull them. It's your circular economy right there. But it's a hard story to tell. Not surprisingly, if you go into the subways there, the subways are filled with advertisements for repair equipment. You know, and you don't repair new stuff. I mean, you do if it's a factory production problem, but you repair used stuff. And that's what they're doing there. You know, again, smartphone maintenance equipment. Why would you be selling that in China? Well, it's because you have a huge market for repaired stuff there. I'm going to show you my favorite market in Huaqiangbei, which is a place that's very uncomfortable to buy, to take photos. So I apologize for the photo. Oh, wait, yeah, more equipment. I don't even know what some of this, you use some of this stuff for, but there's market stalls all over Huaqiangbei. All right, this is the greatest place in all of Huaqiangbei. This is the iPhone market, okay? This is 1/9 of it. So this is one side, then there's the first floor, one side of it. If you look in the cases here, you can see iPhones, but those are not just iPhones. Those are iPhone parts. Now, where are these parts coming from? Some of these are coming out the back door of Apple suppliers. These are clearly new. Some, you know, if you can get one, you can probably get somebody to stamp similar ones. But it's not just cases. The place is filled with this stuff. I mean, Kyle, how many vendors would you say? Thousands. And what are they doing in there? They're making iPhones from used and new parts. You know, and they're fixing them. You can see he's got one there. They are making so many iPhones from old parts that they are literally selling them out of seafood coolers on the street, in front and behind and around and up the street from these Huaqiangbei stores. You know, I have, on one hand, I do what I do, so I find this kind of heroic. I'm also aware that it's illegal, on many levels, at least from if you're Apple. It's, what is it? It's gray market, and some of it's fraudulent because you're assembling iPhones, passing them off as new iPhones when they are not new iPhones. If you go on Alibaba, Lazada, you're going to see iPhones for very cheap shipping from Shenzhen. I can tell you where they're shipping from, and they're not real iPhones, So it's fraud, It's kind of green fraud, though, So you do the moral calculus for me. I haven't made up my mind yet. And do you guys know this video? Yeah, this is Huaqiangbei. He made a big joke out of it, but if you're Donald Trump and you're yelling about intellectual property violations, it's not so entertaining. It's green fraud. I don't know. But anyway, this does a better job of showing you the ecosystem than what I've just done. And if you haven't seen the video, it's really worth watching. It's terrifically done. It's not just iPhones. I'm just going to show you 2 slides of different examples. You know what that is in the right. Those are laptop battery cells. You see what's going on in the left there? Is that clear? It's the same. That's a close-up on the right of what's on the left. Those are cases. So what they do in China when the laptop batteries come back, they take them, they break them, oftentimes on the floor, which I don't recommend, snip out the cells, put them in these cases, charge them up, and then time how long it takes for them to drain. Then there's a market for different capacities. There's a market for 30%, 50%, 70%. And you wrap them up and you got new cell packs. Yeah. Green fraud, because they're selling them as new. I've bought batteries. I bought a laptop battery for out of China once, and and it charged about 70%. You know, that's just what it is. This is the circular economy that could be, unless we design things a little bit better. So I'm going to show you probably the four most important slides I'm going to show you, and then I'm almost done because I know we're all hungry, and I'll take question and answer. This looks like a mess. I'm going to explain to you what it is because it's really, really important. So this was done by an academic in Newfoundland by the name of Josh Leposki, and you should invite him or meet him. He's terrific. You know his work, don't you? So do you know this map? Yeah. So what this is this is a map of global e-waste trade flows in 1996. But here's how it works, okay? The big blue dots, the size of the dot corresponds to how big a generator and exporter they are. And so you can see the United States is a very big blue dot. And if you are shipping from basically a developed country to developed country, you get a blue line, okay? And those would be OECD countries. If you are shipping from a developed country like the United States to Indonesia, you get a green line. So that's what a lot of us think of as e-waste dumping. And if you are a developing country shipping e-waste to another developing country, you get a yellow line. So you can see that in 1996, this trade was a lot of green lines and a few yellow ones and a few blue ones. Now look at 2012. What do you see? And this is the most up-to-date data. It's mostly yellow lines. You know, we have this very developed country-centric, Western-centric view of what our waste problem is. But the fact of the matter is, technology is getting cheaper and people in developing countries are getting richer. And what we do here doesn't quite matter as much anymore because they're going to trade with each other, and that's what they've done. We see it a lot in China, and I've been spending time in Africa. You see a lot of Chinese used equipment moving into Africa. You see African used equipment moving between African countries. And that's what you see here. Let me give you a little bit more of a simpler view of this. This is 1996. This is trade between China. It was shipping stuff between it and Hong Kong and Macau. Not much going on there. Now look at the trade network centered on China. It's become global. So it's interesting in its own right, and it's very important, I think, to get away from this whole notion of this sort of being a Western-centric trade. But the other thing to keep in mind is it's not just about material flows, it's also about idea flows. This is going to be the last video. And what this is, I can't tell you who it is, but this is a factory in the United States that is taking circuit boards and recovering chips from them. And the technique that you're going to be seeing here was taught to them by recyclers in Guayu. So now you're seeing the idea flow, the concept of a recycling economy. Go ahead and just play it, yeah. And the chips will be tested. If I told you that this was being done in China, you'd say, oh, well, you probably wouldn't, but a lot of people would say, oh, how primitive. But it's actually being done right here in the good old USA, and I know there's others doing it as well. So again, it's the idea flow as well. For a long time, folks have been saying that we need to, the developing world needs to, learn to recycle like we do. I think, one of the things we need to be thinking is that maybe the developed world needs to start recycling like the developing world does. And that's a big challenge because there's the whole green fraud aspect to it. There's a lot of problems, but I think it needs to be discussed. I think in general, I keep telling people we all need to start thinking a little bit more like Ray. And with that, this is my book. In case you're interested, I think some of you already seen it, but I'm open to any Q&A, and these are some of the ideas I'm expressing to you are some of the things I'm thinking about for the new book, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on them as well.